unlike many examples in history of when new technology was introduced, in this case, people are looking very closely at the questions of equity and fairness
Mm-hmm.
and justice. That's different. And so we're kind of identifying issues before they come into wide practice in a way that maybe hasn't happened before. So I'm maybe more hopeful. I think none of this stuff is inherent to artificial intelligence. There's ways to overcome it if we're looking for it and we care to. And I think that is exactly what's happening now. We are looking for it and we care to overcome it. And I think we have an opportunity that maybe we will.
Let's learn how our next guests get up, dress up, and show up on purpose. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, morning enthusiasts. Welcome to the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast. I am your host, Lunide Lewis, and today I have the honor of introducing a very special guest to the show. It is going to be quite an episode. I want to bring on today Dr. Joshua Swamidas. He is super unique. He's a PhD artificial intelligence scientist and a medical doctor who wants to help us have better conversations about more of the difficult subjects around race, religion, artificial intelligence, AI itself, and science. And Josh, he's a Christian, a scientist, and he sees no conflict between the two. Now, he believes he can help all of us take some of the sensationalism out of the hot topics and build a better, more meaningful discussion and understanding around it. So it's no further ado. Dr. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
It is a delight. I'm super excited that you decide to join us and make the time to talk to us. Now, I am really excited to hear about the science. We love talking about science and the background behind science and the habits in the body and the mind. But I want, before we get into that technical stuff, let's talk about your journey a little bit. Tell us about, who you are and your journey thus far.
Yeah, so I'm a scientist. I work at Washington University in St. Louis. It's a leading science institution. I run a NIH-funded group using artificial intelligence to answer questions about medicine and biology and chemistry. It's been a really fun thing to take something as crazy as artificial intelligence to go discover new things about the natural world. That's really what I do. And I've really found myself in. But then also I kind of got sucked up into these grand questions about what it means to be human. Thinking
Yeah.
about human origins, thinking about if AI could ever have a mind of its own, and if you could ever actually have like a conversation with a person
Yeah.
that is actually an artificial person, and what makes us different than other animals, and all those sorts of questions. That grand question, they all bring us back to of what it means to be human. And so I've been doing a lot of I've been having a lot of fun, writing stuff for the broader audience and engaging the public around that question too.
Yeah, what sparked your interest in both AI and being a medical doctor?
Well, I wanted to be a medical doctor to help people. My mom worked out in like the rural areas of India,
Mhm.
before I came here. I was born in the United States, um, but I heard stories about that, and there's something so compelling about actually using medicine to help people. The problem is that I don't know if I would have made it a very good clinical doctor. I mean, I did go to medical school, but I found out really early on as a pre-med that I really liked science. I was really made
Mhm.
for and drawn to science.
Yeah.
In particular, I really liked to computer program and software program. I didn't want to be just making web pages and websites,
Yeah.
or dealing with the pure world of math that you see in some computer science. And right at the time I was going to graduate school, there was this new field that arose called computational biology,
Mhm.
where it turns out that biologists were starting to encounter tons and tons of data that we really hope to be helpful for treating patients,
Yeah.
but really required new algorithms and new mathematical approaches to really address. And it just turned out I graduated at just the right moment to enter that field.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good for you because data scientist is huge now. You know, it started coming up on being able to read data and let it interpret it and so that it tells a story. And
Yeah,
surprisingly,
it's mainstream now, but I graduated, it was mainstream now, but I graduated in the year 2000. So that was like 2 decades ago, and it wasn't mainstream.
you pioneered.
So
You
now
were
it's
part of the group to pioneered it.
you know, when I used to tell people that that's what I was doing, you know, 2 decades ago, or wanted to do it, I would get a lot of very quizzical, confused looks. And frankly, even just, you know, a year before, I would have didn't even know that really was an option, right? But
Yeah.
nowadays, yeah, it's like, well, yeah, of course, that's what people should do and are doing, right? It's just that I happen to have been lucky to graduate at just the right moment to be one of the leaders in that field.
Yes, good for you. And I'm glad I have you on here because I saw Coded Bias yesterday on Netflix.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the questions I think is really important to talk about too, race. So coded bias is about how artificial intelligence can have bias. And you know, we're about to publish a paper specifically on how to make neural networks more fair. It's called FairNets. That's not published. It's going to be in archive server by next week, actually. I'm really excited about that. Yeah. And that brings us back to the question of what it means to be human too, right? Are we
Yeah.
all the same? Are we different? Um, I mean, clearly there's differences between humans, but how different does that make us? And how good is the technology we make at navigating those differences in a sensible, humane way?
You know what's
These are really important
crazy?
questions, right?
Those they are. They are a very important question. But you know what's crazy, Dr.
You were just
Joshua?
lost in thought there for a moment.
I was because I'm ready. I'm ready to have this conversation with you right now. I'm like, I'm getting myself ready because what I've found, and I dabbled in data science for a while, and what I notice is especially when it comes to machine learning and how it is flawed, is well, whoever's designing those the machines, or because data machine works where you're feeding it tons and tons of the data so that it can read it. If you wanted to recognize your face, you're gonna give it a tons and tons of pictures to look at. Well, if that data, the information is being fed is already biased, if it's because we're human by nature, we're biased by
Well, because
nature.
reality is biased to start out with. I mean, there's going to be different proportions of different sorts of people in any sample you draw.
Yeah. And so we're finding that. So the machines that we are creating to automate and help the humanity and help us progress, it's not very different from how we were doing things. Because the way we're thinking in terms of the bias or
Well,
the
what I would
prejudice
say is
prejudice.
that, well, I would say is that unlike many examples in history of when new technology was introduced, in this case, people are looking very closely at the questions of equity and fairness
Mm-hmm.
and justice. That's different. And so we're kind of identifying issues before they come into wide practice in a way that maybe hasn't happened before. So I'm maybe more hopeful. I think none of this stuff is inherent to artificial intelligence. There's ways to overcome it if we're looking for it and we care to. And I think that is exactly what's happening now. We are looking for it and we care to overcome it. And I think we have an opportunity that maybe we will.
I absolutely hope so. So tell us about the term the black box.
It's a black box means that it's one way of thinking about deep learning, which has a lot of problems with it, where you just think that because you gave it a ton of data, the algorithm, and you don't even understand how it works, that's the black box piece, but you just trust the fact that you gave it a lot of data to say that it'll work really well. But the fact of the matter is that model of machine learning doesn't work.
Mm.
And people are moving away from that. And in fact, particularly in questions like encoded bias, where this had to do with facial recognition, right?
Yeah.
And there was a scientist that found a very simple test that actually we could have predicted before she did it what the result would be, is that it was much worse at classifying whether or not Black people were male or female than it was classifying whether or not white people were male or female.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't because of any intrinsic bias in the code. It had to do with the fact that the images presented to the algorithm were primarily white people. So it got really good at classifying in that domain, but not very good at classifying in another. Now, once you know to look for it, because you care, there's actually some very clear ways to fix it.
Well,
And
that's
our
good.
group is actually working on algorithmic ways to approach it that can be more scalable. Other groups are too, but you can fix it if you know to look. Problem comes if you just have inattention and you just trust the process too much, or you don't care to even look and ensure that it
Mhm.
really is a fair process for everyone. That's the problem. And once you identify problems, they can be fixed. We just have to care enough. We have to be conscientious enough. We have to have the forethought to
Yeah.
realize that there are people that are different than us,
Yeah.
and that there are domains that we haven't seen that are important too. So it is a statement of values to say that there's this algorithm that works on people that I care about, but there are people that are important too that maybe aren't in my view. That's a value statement, right?
Yeah. And so since it is a machine, we should be able to build it or code it to be all inclusive. We can
Yeah,
we
well,
can
the thing about
program
it
it.
is that the algorithms are very neutral. They just try to optimize what we tell it to optimize. And if we don't
Correct.
tell it to optimize for everyone, it'll just optimize for the dominant group. It
Yeah.
becomes a tyranny of the majority.
I'm so happy that it's becoming in the forefront. Like we're aware of it now. We know that it's happening. And so now we can actually, you and your group, you can actually start finding a solution.
Yeah, well, like I said, the solutions are there. I'll send you a link to the article when it comes out.
Yeah.
Or you can send me an email reminding me. But the key point though is that it is really an orientational problem of as computer scientists or programmers write artificial intelligence code, they have to decide if they're going to be engineers or if they're going to be scientists.
Hmm.
And I think the engineer is just trying to meet to give I mean, this is an analogy that maybe some engineers may not like, but just go with me for what I'm trying to get at and what I mean here. Is to kind of meet some very clearly defined, predetermined, error tolerances to say that you've really met the minimum level of performance by AUC or whatever to be a useful program and you send out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to do it, and you're okay with it being a black box if it actually hit the minimum requirements. That's not how a scientist thinks. The word for science actually means understanding. That's actually the root Latin word which we get the word
Right.
science from. The
Right.
scientist wants to understand. It's not enough to meet some minimal performance requirements or even slightly more extensive performance requirements. We want to understand. And so we're sitting there asking the question of like, well, this isn't in the requirements, but what about this? Will it work in this context?
Mm-hmm.
And to really be curious that way. Now, the thing about it is that that sort of scientific inquiry is at odds and in competition with some business concerns,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And that's why science has always had a complex relationship with business, where we are engaged with business, but we're not business itself, right? We're engaged in engineering, we're not engineering itself. We want to actually understand, even if understanding might, at least in the short run, undermine some business interests. We really want to understand. So we'll do things like actually really look for rare side effects in a drug because we want to make sure we're not putting out a drug that really hurts people. And we'll do that even beyond what the FDA requires sometimes, right?
Right. Yeah. And
And
that's the human part of it. That's what we want to hear. Like somebody is out there taking that in consideration because a lot of us are walking around and don't know that we are the product.
well, your language is, I think, exactly right on. You said that's the human part of it. And when it comes to, for example, developing drugs, people have a lot of issues with drug development, but I'll tell you what, there's a high degree of conscientiousness and concern beyond what the FDA requires among many people in that industry, and certainly among academics that are working in that area. They want to do what's right for the patient and that's going to serve them.
Mm-hmm.
That's at least what the best of them do. And not to say that there aren't bad actors, there can be. People make mistakes, and there's a lot of people looking, right? But there is that deep sense of professional ethics that every physician has. When you go to a physician, you know that even if the hospital administrator tries to interfere, that physician has a clear personal sense of wanting to take care of you, the patient, right?
Right.
It's personal, but it goes beyond personal because even if you've never met the doctor, you know that's true because it's a professional ethic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have that same thing when it comes to machine learning. we know what we think is true, that the majority of people working on mining the data at Facebook, their loyalties lie primarily with Facebook.
Hmm.
And Facebook's loyalties lie primarily with their stockholders. And
Right.
there isn't the same professional ethic that comes in of like, I'm doing science here that is for the good of humanity. And that's in tension with what my employer wants. I can do things that are going to serve the employer, but I also want to really understand and I want to do what's going to serve society. And I think for AI to be good AI, for it to be the best of what humans can bring to the world, it really needs to develop that professional ethic. And forward-thinking companies are going to be thinking through how they can cultivate that sort of ethic that's actually bigger than themselves.
They're growing massively, and they're becoming too big to even penetrate or even consider, because I was blown away at how the amount of data that is gathered upon us, like Google and Facebook, the data that they get up on us, that they're predicting our behaviors with that data. I'm blown away by that. And you wonder, you know, we're unaware. A lot of people are unaware that this is happening. And I
Yeah,
think
so one way to deal with this is by to try to opt out of it, but that's not very effective, frankly. That actually comes with major downsides. I think you could try to disallow it, but the fact of the matter is that's totally unenforceable, and in fact, that's how a lot of good could come. The real question
that's what I'm
comes
saying.
is like,
It's already too big. It's
how do
already
we
grown so much that how do you make it? How do you make a difference? How do you even?
well, so like if you go, it's like I'm a physician too, right? I don't treat patients now, but I went to medical school, and for a while I did. We get access to very personal, private information, and we get access to the bodies of patients. We have ability to do great harm and great good with these
Mhm.
with the actual bodies of patients too,
Yeah.
right? And the reason why the public trusts physicians for the most part is, for the most part, we have taken that to be an incredibly high calling and responsibility that transcends our employment. Like if
Hmm.
any of us were convinced that our employers were doing serious harm to patients, especially if that was happening intentionally and they were unwilling to correct it, we as a matter of conscience would leave. I mean, that's what would happen, right?
Yeah.
So there's actually only so much that a hospital or other employer can do um, of damage, because we actually deeply care about patients that way. For the most part, I'm not saying that there isn't bad apple doctors. There are,
But
but we'll
as a physician, though, when
yeah.
talking about addiction, right? Like the social media, the algorithm, the way it is set up, that it forces you to be addicted to wanting to check to get the dopamine release when you get a like, when you get a post, when you get some engagement, and that can be hard to break because now they're messing with the psychology.
Yeah, so this is, I think, where it comes out. I think for people working in the tech industry, and also for the companies here, I think the companies are important too. I mean, like it took a lot of not just merely individuals acting well, but actually institutions working to create structures for this, right? How do we actually create a good AI? How do we create a process where there's real professional ethics around this, professional pride in doing good, and professional responsibility to prevent bad, where we really want to understand what we're doing in society, and
Yeah.
how and to really recognize that we can unintentionally put out very harmful things
Mm-hmm.
that have unintended consequences. That's just a fact of the world. I mean, you don't have to be a racist to put forward software that could have profoundly racist consequences.
Mm-hmm.
There's an example that happened that was important, where there was a machine learning used to kind of do recommendations within an app for what types of businesses would be good and useful to a person. And in certain parts of our country, like for example in St. Louis, there's a very stark racial divide. There's certain neighborhoods that are Black, that are literally like a walk away across the street, and it's like a white neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
The algorithms were learning the divides and only recommending people to go to places in the white neighborhood, not because of it had determined that the Black areas in the Black neighborhood were inherently worse, but just that they were trafficked less. So it was just sending people to the places that were trafficked more. And that ended up amplifying, like, divides, right?
Yeah.
And it has an impact on school systems because now there's less taxes going to these places. And so this app was actually creating like the exact segregation that Martin Luther King marched against.
I
Not
know.
because it was racist, not because the people who programmed it were racist. And I think that's a very important thing. These were not KKK, Ku Klux Klanners going out there trying to injure Black neighborhoods. That's not what was happening. It was just inattention. It was just inattention and a lack of understanding. And that's what it did.
What do we do? Because the machine is learning. It's learning from our behavior. Do we change our behavior then?
Well, no. So what you do then, like in that case, is you can look at that situation and say, oh, I created a software that's rewarding something that is actually not good for society. And it's probably even impacting my customers in a negative way. I mean, and frankly, when you think about it, when it comes to recommending people a restaurant, sometimes you want to go to the well-trafficked places, but you sometimes want to discover the forgotten
a hole in
gem.
the wall. Mm-hmm.
And you also sometimes want to, as a matter of ethics, even go into neighborhoods that have been neglected and serve them by getting a meal there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very easy when you kind of put those two things together that they could actually have served their patient. I mean, not their patients. I'm thinking as a physician, they could have served their customers better by bringing these things to the surface more, creating different ways for them to be exposed to stuff in a way that wouldn't impact them if they wanted to continue going to that white neighborhood, but would also kind of expose them to these realities to actually introduce those often Black owners to whole new markets and to really kind of privilege them in a place where they had been unintentionally disprivileged, right?
Right.
I think this is one of the key aspects when it comes to really reforming society. We have to understand that we participate unaware in sustaining real injustice in the world. And it's unaware. That is a fundamental fact. So it's not that people are out there racist often. I mean, there are racists out there that are sustaining this stuff. But if we don't understand, we'll just continue this.
Yeah. Is that your intention with Peaceful Science?
Hey, with Peaceful Science, so I founded Peaceful Sciences. It's a group of scientists of religious and non-religious backgrounds that want to do a better job building trust between scientists and the general public. And we want to increase understanding in areas that we really studied a lot. I studied artificial intelligence a lot. Another place where I've done a lot of work, I recently published a book on, is in human origins. It's called The Genealogical Adam and Eve, looking at what population genetics really tells us about human origins and how that interacts with what the religious public thinks about it. Another place where there's a large need for trust to be built. You could look across so many domains in society where you could see we're just really suffering because scientists are not well trusted, and we haven't done a good job building trust to do this. And we haven't always acted in a trustworthy way either.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we want to do better at Peaceful Science. We want to create a way for scientists to have more trust and to be more trustworthy in engaging the public.
That's good to know. Bridging the gap between the two. Now, a step further, how about science and spirituality? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, I think that there's a large number of Christians that care about, or Muslims or Jewish people or Hindus that care about real, scientific questions, right? And as scientists, we have to remember that the scientific work we do really touches on grander questions that people have been asking about long before science existed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we do a disservice to the science, and we do a disservice to the public that funds science when we're not engaged with those questions in a sensitive way. It's not that science gives us the whole story, but it sometimes is relevant to these larger questions, and we can be better at thinking about how to engage those questions in a way that's true to the science, and it's also engages concerns outside of science.
You also have the flip side, where you have spiritual people, you have Christians that don't want to take science into consideration too.
So my experience with that is that a lot of the religious community that is called anti-science, they are very disaffected there's been a break of trust for a whole host of reasons. And it's a two-way thing. There's been real mistakes made in those communities at times, but also scientists can do better engaging them with more empathy towards their questions. So we can't change what the answers of what science gives, but sometimes we find out that what religious communities have cared about are different and distinct from what actually science says, even though it uses the same name. And a great example of this, it came up in Human Origins, was that, a lot of religious communities were really asking questions about human origins and about what humans are and when they arise in history. But a little known fact among people outside of science, which is very clear to people who work in anthropology, is that we don't actually have a good definition of science, of what science is. I mean, sorry, of what human is.
Mm.
And so you can't really ask the question or give a sensible answer of what human is unless you actually have a clear answer on what human is. You don't know when they arise if you don't know what they are. And we can talk about Homo sapiens, and sometimes people do refer to that as human, but that's not actually what theologians and people of faith were really caring about. They meant something different. And there isn't actually a good correspondence between what the religious community cared about when they were talking about human and what scientists mean when they talk about human. And so with sensitivity, that difference of meaning, it turns out maybe there's a lot less conflict.
Yeah, and then when you bring in the notion of spirituality and universe and how a bundle of energy and that infinite intelligence, right? That's a new term. That's a different term for it. When you think about that, there's an ultimate goal, was humanistic goal, right? It's to be loved, it's to love, and it's to contribute, it's to add value, it's to give back, and then believing in that higher.
Well, so you're talking about like a humanistic value, which is a great way to put it. But here's a key thing that I think a lot of scientists who are often atheists and humanists sometimes forget. Science doesn't actually bring us to humanist values. That direction, like that's a place where science can't bring us there. It tells us a lot of useful things about the world, but when we come with that value of wanting to use our science to serve the world, to serve humanity, and to make the world a better place, that's us adding something really important and valuable to the science that isn't actually science itself.
Intriguing. To find a way to marry the two.
Well, we do it all the time. I think what it comes down to is that we're in a very divided, broken society where people disagree, and the disagreements have really grown into injuries. And we just need to get better at talking to people we disagree with across those disagreements, and even with scientists, talking to people that disagree with us on science, and try to build trust across those divides. That's the task. That's the task of what it means to seek peace in a divided world.
Well put. Talk to somebody with a different idea, different opinion. Follow somebody with a different idea, different opinion, because you don't want to get stuck in your own thinking either. You don't want to get stagnant. Well put, Dr. Joshua. Now I have to ask, how do you get up, dress up, and show up? How do you prep yourself to get up as a physician, as a scientist? What's your morning routine like?
So I have small kids. So my morning routine is my 5-year-old. So one of my kids is too young. He's in a crib, so he's trapped in the morning. But my 5-year-old gets up before anyone else, and usually before he's allowed to, and squeezes into bed between my wife and I. And so our morning routine is having like a rowdy little 5-year-old in our bed, reminding us that we're part of a family. We're connected to one another, and the day has begun. And it's at times frustrating and maddening, and at the same time, it's also beautiful and good to know that there is people in this world waiting for us to wake up.
Yeah, keeping you grounded.
And we're connected. Yeah. So I think that is a involuntary aspect of my morning routine right now that I probably would not choose, but it's also deeply good.
Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of content, what are you consuming? And what you're doing in here.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that might be surprising to a lot of people, but I don't eat breakfast intentionally for health reasons. Actually, there's some people have said that eating breakfast is healthy, but intermittent fasting, there's an immense amount of work done on it. So for the most part, I only eat within an 8-hour period between noon and 8 p.m. That's when I consume the vast majority of my calories. And then so in the mornings, I'm fasting.
Then what are some of the habits that you can contribute to your success, to your productivity, that are unique to you?
Yeah, so a key part of it has been, well, having small kids, that was a big change. So making sure I had time to actually come into the office instead of just working from home all the time. And I was fortunate to be able to do that even during COVID, is important, right? Another thing too, honestly, I kind of embracing my night owlness. On top of running an NIH funded group, being a professor, I wrote a book for the public, which is something you're not supposed to do. I wrote this book. Most of that book was written actually after 10 p.m. My most productive time when, all the kids and the wife and everyone is in bed, don't get any important emails like flooding my inbox and nothing happening.
Let us know how we can find your book and connect with you.
Oh yeah, you can find me at peacefulscience.org. Sign up for the mailing list if you want to know more and explore the articles there. And if you want to read my book and you have questions about human origins, it's The Genealogical Adam and Eve, published in 2019. You can get it on Amazon, and hopefully it's helpful to you.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put that on the show notes there. Thank you for sharing that information. Very insightful.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please comment and tell us what was your favorite part, your favorite habit that you are going to try out for yourself today. Comment below. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. Until next time, I will see you at the top of your best morning routine ever. Stay blessed.